Unity's spire hung in the dark like a cathedral forged from starlight. Its rings spun slowly, catching the glow of a newborn nebula and bending it into ribbons that flowed past the conference hall's glass. Flags and sigils from 12 species floated in a patient current. For the first time, Earth's seal hung among them. President Mara Leto stood at the window and studied the traffic. Needle-finned cruisers that flexed like schools of fish, brick-bright freighters with hulls tattooed in trade glyphs, and a living craft the size of a stadium that pulsed with bioluminescent blues. She had been a soldier who learned to speak softly, then a diplomat who never forgot how to stand her ground. The translator pinned to her lapel hummed as she stepped to the dais. "Friends," she said, and a dozen languages harmonized. "We arrived with calloused hands and a history written in ash. You judged us honestly. You warned us that strength can rot into cruelty. We listened. We built. Today we sign not only a treaty but a promise to wield our strength for shelter, not conquest, to answer fear with discipline." The room held its breath. On the far tier, hooded delegates of the Thren Dominion hawks of the council sat like carved obsidian. One rose, a sleeve shifted. Security moved too far, too late. A blade of blue light cracked the air with a glassy scream and punched through Mara's chest. The hall exploded into motion. The assassin lifted her as if to display a trophy. "Humanity is a contagion." The voice rang through every speaker. "Better to cauterize now than amputate later." Colonel Noah Arden hit the stage in a blur, a bolt of white heat from his sidearm answering the blue. The hooded figure fell, then vanished in a ripple of air, leaving the smell of ozone and a stain on the floor. Mara's blood warmed Noah's hands. She drew herself to the mic with a grip that still brokered treaties. "Remember," she whispered, her voice somehow amplified by a hall that had been designed to honor words. "Remember what we promised and make it true." Her fingers loosened. The treaty slate slid from her palm and struck the floor with a sound like a bell. 8 billion humans watched their president die with the galaxy as witness. The funeral in New Boston ran without chants or curses. No torches, no mobs. Just 1 million people in dark coats along a quiet river where Mara had learned to swim as a child, and a casket under 2 flags, Earth's and the banner of United Human Space. Aliens came. The Thren did not. Within 72 hours the silence sharpened. Human traffic reversed like a tide pulled by a black moon. Cargo captains abandoned lucrative lanes mid-transit. Research liaisons packed crates with notes and thank-you letters and boarded the first homebound shuttle. Trade hubs lost the friendly clutter of Terran uniforms. All public channels to foreign polities went dark. Even the old emergency frequencies, the ones everyone kept open by habit, fell quiet. The assembly met in a single session that lasted till dawn. When it ended, Noah Arden walked out wearing an old dress uniform and a new mandate, custodian of Earth. He stood at a window that faced the Atlantic shipyards and watched cranes turn like migrating birds. The skyline, always a puzzle of glass and steel, began to sprout ribs of black metal frames for vessels that did not exist on any public registry. His comm chirped. "Director Iyabo, Project Lantern." The voice came from 3 kilometers below sea level. "Lantern is lit. 12 catalogs complete. Political hierarchies mapped. Fleet dispositions, critical infrastructure, personal networks, financial arteries, cultural fault lines. We have locations for 73 Thren principals and 216 auxiliaries." Arden closed his eyes. Mara had asked for patience and built it into policy. Arden had prepared for the day patience broke. Timeline: 36 days, Iyabo replied. A full council cycle. Demand the principals who ordered the strike. If they do nothing, we do what we trained for without firing a shot. Arden looked toward a black silhouette rising in the shipyard. Draft the ultimatum, plain words, no rhetoric. He paused. Make sure they can translate the last line without ambiguity. We seek justice. We will not bargain with terror, comply in 36 days, or face remedies of our choosing. On the 36th night, a new light appeared over Unity's spire, a cold, narrow star that pulsed once, then went dark. No one knew what it meant yet. On Earth, warehouses that had stuffed themselves with wheat and medkits took on crates the weight of cities. In orbit, something the size of a mountain rotated slowly, its skin swallowing starlight. Humanity did not shout. It prepared. The galaxy mistook the quiet for grief. It was calibration. Day 36 ended without a reply from the Thren Dominion. Day 37 began with a scream on every frequency and a silence on 3 worlds. Carax, Rune, and Peel's V were not capitals. They were teeth, fortress planets that bit down on the main trade's spine and dared anyone to pry it open. At dawn, their orbital traffic looked normal. Shuttles lifting, cargo sleds coasting, sentinel platforms idling like patient sharks. By noon, civilian beacons started transmitting distress codes that were all the more terrifying for their banality. No fires reported, no impacts recorded, no hostile vessels detected. Streets simply emptied. Kitchens burned food no one came back to taste. Scout cutters hypered in. They found atmosphere, breachless hulls, running water, power grids at 87%. And in each planetary capital, at the precise center of the main square, a plate of brushed steel on a plinth of basalt. For the light, no bodies, no blood, no residue of mass transport, just absence and the smell of citrus cleaner in places where breakfast dishes had been left to soak. The council assembled in a panic. Delegates shouted the word genocide, then swallowed it when live feeds showed cities unbroken, gardens untrampled, pets wandering through open doors and lying down to wait. Where are they? The Altari admiral demanded. Where did humanity take millions of citizens? The chamber doors opened. Leah Arden, Noah's daughter, Mara's protege and translator, walked in wearing a black suit without insignia and a small silver pin shaped like a lantern. She placed a neat briefcase on the table and waited. The chair finally remembered to ask her to speak. They are alive, Leah said, voice even. They have food, water, and air, and more sky than they have seen in their lives. They have no weapons, no transmitters, no way to make more of either for a while. Consider this a confinement that teaches cooperation. You kidnapped worlds, the Ver envoy hissed. We relocated hostile populations complicit by vote, funding, or force, in a political faction that used terrorism against a diplomat under formal protection, Leah answered. By council charter, defensive measures are permitted against ongoing threats when the body charged with adjudication is conflict entangled. The word entangled hung like a quiet accusation. Delegates stared at their own shoes. A dozen hands went up. How? How did you move millions without starlift scars, without transport signatures, without panic? Leah opened the briefcase and set a disc on the table, a dull metal thing the size of a dessert plate. This is a lattice tap, she said. It harvests ambient energy from the vacuum field. Your physicists call the reservoir a myth. Ours built plumbing. Pair a tap with a displacement cusp and you can step matter through a hole you only open for a heartbeat. We used your own local infrastructure as anchors. You are very generous with standards documents. Impossible, someone whispered, as they always do when the future has already arrived. Predictable, Leah replied. War compresses engineering into seasons instead of centuries. Humanity endured 1,000 seasons of it. We learned to make abundance portable and to make violence extremely expensive. The thren seats were empty. You have 1 week, Leah said, turning from technology to terms. Deliver the planners, the ones who paid for Mara Leto's murder, signed the routing orders, and authorized a weapon in a hall made for words. If we receive them, we stop. If we do not, more teeth come out without cracking the jaw. More relocations, the Altari asked. Leah's face did not change. We prefer the term remediation. It ends when accountability begins. Outside the chamber, panic raced faster than courier craft. Thren officials burned archives and tried to defect to client states that suddenly discovered a passion for border law. Traders peeled the Thren crest from their hulls. On Unity Spire, civil defense drilled evacuation for the first time in a century. Everywhere, a phrase began to circulate like a weather report shared between dockworkers and pilots. The lantern is lit. On Earth, the mountain in orbit revealed edges, facets swallowing skylight and reflecting nothing. In the shipyards, black hulls rolled out like words struck from a redacted page. Noah Arden listened to status reports as if they were lullabies. Phase gates stable, cusp tolerance within margin, tap arrays green, night chorus at ready, standing by for polite entry, non-lethal first. Polite? Iyabo asked over a tight beam. We catch monsters, Noah said, but we don't become them. Make sure every boarding begins with a request. He closed the link and let the silence of his office collect around him. Mara's pen, rescued from the dais, lay in a glass case on his desk. Under it, the line she had written in the margin of her last draft looked like a commandment. Be strong enough to choose mercy. Be disciplined enough to make it hurt. The council bled questions and theater for 3 days. The Thren seat stayed empty. Leah arrived on time, left on time, and yielded only what she intended. On the 4th day she brought a map. Holo light formed a ring of green worlds. Relocation sites, she said. Temperate, breathable, clean water. Seed kits and manuals for sanitation, farming, and shelter. No firearms, no radios. Pressure forces cooperation. In 3 generations, some will curse us. Others will found councils. Both outcomes are better than training children for murder. The Altari admiral rubbed his brow. You are sentencing societies. We are assigning work as atonement, Leah said. Death is brief, building is long. A Verdelegate leaned forward. Share the method. Charter demands parity. The charter imagined neighbors on similar timelines, Leah answered. It did not imagine a people that spent its centuries surviving itself. We will share what does not hand tyrants a city vanish button. Then you claim superiority while asking membership. We claim responsibility, Leah said, glancing at the empty Thren chairs. Decide if you prefer us inside the system with obligations or outside it with none. The room quieted. Law without will is ink in water. Earth had will. Noah Arden did not attend. He worked in a windowless room where the ceiling mimicked an Atlantic dawn, so he remembered he lived under a sky. The team called itself Night Chorus. Their brief, collect the planners alive. The constraints filled pages, polite challenge, non-lethal dominance, no collateral. They practiced boarding civilian vessels at fractional C, stepping through stabilized cusps into closets, signaling wrist blade, implanted jammer. Fake cough means detonator. They learn to carry presence like gravity. Fear starts fights. Gravity stops them. In Thren space, the planners scattered. Medical ships, emptied fortresses, and asteroid kingdom under stolen point defense. Neutral ports discovered a sudden passion for border law. Leah's 1-week clock reached its final sunrise. The council sent a note polished by 20 lawyers and 3 poets. It apologized for delays, promised inquiries, and asked for patience. Night Chorus checked its watch. The operation opened not with thunder but with small courtesy, a chime on a bridge, a rap on an airlock, a calm voice on public bands. "Good afternoon, Captain. Human Space Service. May we verify your manifest?" On the medship Mercy of Rune, Chief Surgeon Havoc stepped into a ward smelling of iodine and found 3 humans reading charts. "We seek a man registered as Pilm Technician," the tallest said. "He is Marshal Tazen of the Thren Home Fleet. We will take him quietly. Your patients may keep their Roman 4. On the asteroid kingdom, a crowd watched 6 figures in black walk the outer hull without mag boots. Point defenses slept. The king signed a surrender like an autograph and asked for a lawyer. He received water, a blanket, and the advice to sleep. Night Chorus did not humiliate, it collected. Even when everything worked, somebody bled. A junior officer named Darin took a vibro blade across the forearm from a cornered admiral. He blocked with his other wrist and said, "Sir, please," in a voice that slowed the room. The blade fell. The fight ended before anyone could be brave and stupid. At hour 72, 39 principals sat in clear restraint fields that felt like warm gel. At hour 84, the count was 46. One remained, Arches Varach, Minister of Security and architect of the murder. He crawled into a mountain on Thren Prime and ringed himself with shields thick enough to turn a star lance. Single entrance. 5 blast doors. Lock keyed to his heart. He slept in armor. At hour 96, Varach woke in a white room with 1 chair and his name on the door. On the table lay a brushed steel card. For the light. A voice behind him said, "Good morning. Breakfast is warm. Trial at noon." A dozen hands went up at once, palms and digits and fronds. The questions kept trying to turn into accusations and then retreating into etiquette. Leah refused to play either game. "We chose worlds with mild weather and stubborn soil," she added. "Enough resistance to teach patience. Enough reward to make patience worth it. We left libraries because mercy without instruction is just abandonment wearing a nicer coat." "Arrogant," someone muttered. "Accountable," Leah said. "We have names, dates, and signatures. When those arrive here in custody, we stop moving anyone else." Night Chorus trained in warehouses that smelled of machine oil and in rooms so white they looked like erasures. They practiced saying please while taking a weapon apart in midair. They practiced smiling without mockery. Someone wrote on the wall in grease pencil, "We are here to end the scene, not to star in IT." It stayed up through inspection day. They held the trials on Unity Spire, in the amphitheater where Mara Leto's voice had once filled the air. Human ships ringed the station at a distance you could not measure. Delegations came in dress uniforms and careful faces. Traders came because traders always drift where history can be bought in rumor and sold in freight. Noah Arden wore a suit cut like the memory of a uniform. Leah sat at council with a stack of slates and tea that never seemed to cool. 47 figures stood in their fields, dry light that held like glass, and watched the gallery with expressions from rage to calculation to too late regret. This tribunal convenes to decide consequences for an act committed under the banner of fear, Noah said. The translator rendered fear into a dozen words, all slightly wrong. The defendants may speak. Some did. Varech preached contagion and shepherds culling wolves. One cried until his voice failed. A woman in gray whispered that she had only funded a committee that had paid a shell company that had purchased a teleport spike that carried a murderer into this hall. She asked if the line between vote and blade could be drawn somewhere kinder. Leah presented records that turned rhetoric to archaeology, funds moving like ants along fiber, minutes where no one said kill, but everyone said interrupt the process decisively, a maintenance badge that put a friendly engineer inside the spire 2 hours before the attack. The story of the murder wrote itself as a policy memo. Punishment, someone blurted from the gallery. The word landed like a dropped wrench. We do not auction suffering for applause, Noah said. We assign labor equal to harm. The holo widened to a star sketched with thin light. Gilead's fall, Noah said. Old sun, good soil. It can hold 30,000 with ease, and more with work. 32 of you who signed, guided, funded, and ordered the operation will go there with families who choose to follow. You will receive a year of rations, tool libraries, medical supplies, no radio, no guns, no one to conquer. We will visit in 10 years to count schools. Varech laughed, Brittle and the other 15. They asked for death, Leah said, voice a blade-warm whisper. They will receive a sleep that ends without waking. It is more mercy than they offered. Reactions broke into a dozen languages. A runner in human gray stepped to the rail and murmured in Noah's ear. He listened, then looked up at the gallery as if measuring what it could bear. Nexus Station, he said, 3 million civilians. A Thren remnant has seized the core and wired the frame. They demand release of these prisoners within 10 minutes. Silence, then chaos. Noah raised a palm. The room stopped. He looked to Leah. She slid a slate across the table. A single line, let the world watch us keep our promise. Noah opened the public channel. You have chosen to press a blade to the throat of strangers, he told the hijackers. So you will be treated as a medical condition. Stand by. He cut the line and nodded. Somewhere beyond sight, taps warmed, cusps formed, and Night Chorus stepped through keys that had never existed until this second. For 10 minutes, the amphitheater watched a status bar that crept from left to right under a single phrase, remediation in progress. Lights on Nexus flickered. Feeds cut to empty corridors where uniforms lay in careful piles. Demolition charges that had studded the station like barnacles now sat in a neat stack on the cargo floor with a note in 3 languages about proper disposal. Someone, probably Darren, had drawn a smiley face on the last page. No one cheered. Relief was too large for noise. Noah turned back to the defendants. You do not command leverage, he said. You try to turn a city into a bargaining chip. We turned your men into an absence. He looked at the council. Earth accepts membership and obligations. We do not accept the premise that peace must negotiate with knives. We will be your most stubborn ally and your most boring neighbor. We will be a bad enemy. He gestured for the bailiffs. This sentence is entered, Leah said, standing. Tomorrow we begin the part that is harder than punishment. We begin to build the thing Mara Leto promised. In the lobby, a trader from the Rim photographed the brushed steel card in the exhibit case. one of many recovered from empty squares and quiet fortresses. The text caught the lobby lights and threw them back like a warning and a prayer. For the light, the verdict traveled on 1,000 tongues and 1,000,000 whisper nets. It arrived as numbers before it arrived as grief. 32 to exile, 15 to sleep, embargoes on 5 polities, audits on 7 more. Markets wobbled. Freight contracts dissolved in flurries of bureaucratic snow. Pilots found favorite canteens shuttered and favorite mechanics studying new rules about transponders and humane use cargo. The galaxy, which preferred its morality thin enough to pour, discovered viscosity. Leah Arden did not hide from the arithmetic. She sat at a slate with envoys who had sworn they had never even heard of the Thren Finance Ministry, and walked them through ledgers with her fingertip. "This column," she said, tapping a tidy string of figures, "paid for scanners used to ghost securities cameras on Unity Spire. This column paid an unregistered courier to place a transport spike in a cleaning cart." The envoys defended, then conceded, then tried to buy absolution. Leah did not take money. She took programs, scholarships for groundside children whose homes had been strip-mined by Thren contractors, hospital wings on border worlds where accidental radiation spikes coincided with prospecting leases, ship time for algae farmers to move to cleaner seas. Reparations should look like the future, she said, not like penance receipts. The resistance gathered where resistance always gathers, at the edge of maps. 3 midweight polities promised a peacekeeping coalition that would sail to Unity Spire to secure fair trials. The press releases were warm milk. The fleets were sharp knives. Noah Arden read their manifests, missile counts filed dutifully with insurers, then pointed at a patch of interstellar drift and said, "There." Night Chorus did not decloak to threaten. It laced the dust between the coalition ships with a field that made kinetics forget what momentum was. A salvo of test rounds drifted like confetti. Point Defense shrugged and went back to reading the poetry of empty space. Demonstration concluded. Noah sent on open band. "We recommend returning fuel to tanks and budgets to schools." The coalition admiral asked for talks. When he arrived, he discovered the conference table arranged with 3 chairs. His, Noah's, and one for an independent observer wearing the blue sash of the Altari Neutral Service. Leah poured tea and placed a metal card at the center as if it were a name plate. The admiral stared at the engraving and read it aloud because reading it aloud helped him accept that the meeting was not about leverage. For the light, Noah nodded. "Our doctrine," he said. "The opposite of darkness is not fire, it is illumination. If you step on civilian throats to reach your definition of order, we will remove your foot without breaking the neck you misjudged as yours." The embargoes bit. At the rim, smugglers offered empathy packages, radios, firearms, and seeds to ships bound for relocation worlds. Night Chorus boarded 3 such freighters and left the crews without charges, without cargo, and with a list of community colleges on Earth and Ceres that would accept them with work-study positions. "There's money in mercy, too," Darren told a stunned captain, handing back a packed lunch. "It just takes longer to arrive." On Unity Spire, a museum exhibit opened with artifacts donated by witnesses. A shard of blue light sealed inside glass like a frozen scream. A maintenance badge with the paint worn thin by a thumb that pressed it through 1,000 doors. A pen rescued from a dais. Children on field trips pressed their hands to the case and counted the scratches. The docent spoke in the soft voice museums use when admitting that history has weight. "She wrote with this," the docent said, "and the line she wrote last is above the door." Visitors looked up as they left. The letters were simple, readable from a moving crowd. Be strong enough to choose mercy. Be disciplined enough to make it hurt. In the reflection of that sentence, a ship the size of a mountain turned once quietly beyond the glass. Power, left to itself, invents its own gravity. No one knew this as a soldier and more urgently as a custodian. So Earth convened a council not of admirals but of teachers, jurists, ethicists, paramedics, refugees, and elders who had survived the century when coastal cities learned to sleep with seawall alarms. They met in an old concert hall with good acoustics, because the human ear honors truth better when it can hear its own breath between the words. They wrote the lantern oath. No displacement without census. The first clause read, "No movement of populations without a full accounting of names, ages, abilities, and family ties. No family separated unless they choose it. No displacement of bread or books." The second clause read. In practice, that meant warehouses left full and libraries left fuller. Shelves of manuals on irrigation and child fever and shingles and soil pH traveled with the exiles. Weapons did not. A third clause named witnesses. No operation without 3 observers from non-aligned species, selected by lot, given full view, given veto when the mission's soul slipped. The fourth clause broke a few hearts on the net because it named Earth as subject to its own scalpel. Any human officer who used the lattice tap for personal vengeance or private enrichment would be hauled under lights as hard as the ones Thren planners had learned to squint against. The penalty scaled with harm, censure, exile, or sleep. It was one thing to hold your enemies, Leah told the cameras. It was another to hold your friends. "Mercy for us cannot be easier than mercy for them," she said. "Otherwise we have built theater, not virtue." The first test came nearly at once. A decorated captain named Vance, who had lost a brother on a convoy Mara once visited, took a black boat off its flight plan and parked it above a Thren archive depot. He did not use a cusp. He used a missile, and he did not ask for witnesses. The blast tunneled through concrete, turned records to powder, and threw 7 clerks then busy with inventory into walls they never finished hitting. Vance returned to base with a face like a clenched fist and a statement in his hand about deterrence. Noah read the statement and folded it back into the envelope. "You carried heat," he said, "to a place we are trying to empty of it." Night Chorus took Vance not to a cell but to the same amphitheater where policy found its shape. The oath had been signed an hour before. Its ink had not dried. Ears had. The witnesses, an Altari teacher, a verdurist, and a woman from Lagos who had rebuilt a school 3 times on floodplain, asked Vance about fear and about the moment he mistook it for permission. He answered. He also learned to listen. He went into exile, not to Gilead's fall. Exile without guns is punishment. Exile with a toolkit is practice. He got a shovel, a water purifier, a box of seeds, and a charter to raise roofs on a Relief League world too proud to ask for help. "You wanted to remake the Thren," Leah told him quietly before the shuttle door closed. "Start by remaking something that wanted your help and never got it." The debate did not end because one man left. It deepened. Commentators worried that the oath would slow operations, and they were right. Slowness grew roots. Missions carried contingency plans in 3 languages and began with a reading of the witness clause. Logistics discovered that shipping library crates took longer than shipping bullets but produced fewer funerals. Night Chorus trained to pause. If you can step through a wall, Darren told recruits, you can step back through one too. They had to step back twice in the first month, once because a relocation site's water table proved treacherous, once because the presence of a statue in a village square made Leah insist on a cultural pause. If they carved this, they made time for beauty, she said. We owe them time for a proper goodbye. The oath traveled outward. A midrim polity adapted it into a domestic policing code. An asteroid syndicate rewrote it as a pirate's pledge that at least made them pick only fat targets. The Altari Neutral Service adopted the witness clause in full, ended a long debate about spectator diplomacy, and began wearing the blue sash into rooms where knives had names and chairs for each one. At the end of the month, the oath hung in Noah's office alongside Mara's pen. He read it out loud once a week with his senior staff, and once alone when the night shift changed the lights to a dawn amber that forgiven men learned to love. The oath did not make him comfortable. It made him responsible. The first rain on Gilead's fall arrived sideways like a correction. The air turned silver. The children ran outside because children always do. The adults shouted about roofs and water barrels. Then the grown-ups stood under the weather and let it find their faces. Rain writes a language villages can read. It writes the slope of eaves and the friendship of gutters and the schedule of seeds. No human landed. A council observer boy, Altari blue and vercrystal, hung in high sky to watch with cold eyes and warmer hopes. It did not transmit coordinates. It transmitted patterns, number of roofs, number of fires, whether the smoke smelled like food or fear. Earth received the feed with the same attention it gave to early flotillas of fragile ships. Humanity loves maps. It is still learning to love patience. At first the exiles tried to rebuild their old hierarchy, with new titles carved into wood. It failed in 3 weeks because wood rots, and because no one is good at tyrant work without guns. The biggest man in the first settlement discovered that fetch-carry lift made him useful, but not sovereign. The woman who had kept a ledger for a weapons contractor learned that accounting for seeds and work hours and roofs is a kind of literacy that earns respect faster than threats do. 2 cousins who had voted funds for decisive interruption now argued at sunrise about irrigation angles, and at sunset sang the same song because the song tallied who had fetched water and who needed a rest. They wrote a compact. It was not eloquent. It said, "We will count days by food and roofs and funerals we avoid. We will share tools and argue about the fairest way. We will make a school where the first lesson is how to fix a pump and the second is how to read the manual. We will appoint a keeper for the books and another for the seeds. Neither may marry the other. If either steals, the village will feed them anyway and remove the stole-from thing from their control." A boy, 8, maybe 9, found a steel card half buried at the edge of the square, left from the day the world emptied. He traced the letters with a stick and asked his mother what they meant. "For the light," she sounded out with him. He scowled. "For whose light?" She answered without drama. "For the one we make when we don't let the night use our hands." On the 4th month, pirates arrived because pirates also read patterns. They wore rags that looked theatrical and carried the kind of guns that rattle when you shake them. They landed to take grain, tools, and a dozen teenagers. Night Chorus watched from an orbit so gentle it didn't tug on dust. The oath cut both ways. No guns in their hands, Darren noted, as if to remind his own trigger finger. They made theirs before they learned to clean them. The pirates found that the village had built its granary in the middle of the square with a roof too heavy to lift and a floor too smooth to climb without a rope. The village kept somewhere else. They also found that the teenagers had rehearsed an evacuation into a stand of thorn where pirates could not walk without cussing out loud. Then they found themselves standing in a field where the sky hummed and their weapons turned into warm paperweights. A woman with a ledger told them to put the paperweights in a pile and pick up baskets. "There's a field at the edge that needs stones moved," she said. "Move enough and you can leave with a sack of grain and the promise that if you come back with less stupidity, there's a roof to sleep under while you show us what you know." They did not know what to do, so they moved stones. Night Chorus logged the intervention as education, informal. The observer boy added a note. Singing resumed at dusk. Elsewhere, a relocation site faltered because the spring ran dry. Leah moved the map pin without moving the people. Earth shipped books on wells and pumps and aquifers by dropping them through a cusp that opened for a breath and closed with a smell like rain. The oath's second clause, no displacement of books, had become something else, a promise that instruction would arrive even when instructors could not. In the 6th month, a council ombudsman asked on open band whether this was civilization or quarantine. Leah answered from a garden plot behind the assembly building where tomatoes learned the taste of Martian soil in summer. "Both," she said, pulling a weed. "We quarantined the virus that believed knives could vote, and we're teaching hands that only knew how to hold a trowel. There's nothing pure about it. Purity is for statues. Life is for mud." They convened in the same hall again because continuity turns architecture into argument. The banners were the same. The faces were not. Delegates who had watched Mara Leto bleed now watched a different kind of release. Budgets loosening after hard audits. Embargoes lifting with conditions attached like safety rails. Children of 3 species played tag in a gallery where a shard of blue light slept in glass. They avoided the case without being told. Myth educates. Leah brought a document bound in gray cloth. It was not a treaty. It was a set of edits. The charter assumed neighbors on similar ladders. She told the chamber. It codified reciprocity without imagining asymmetry this violent or this disciplined. The lantern clauses do 4 things. Affirm proportional non-kinetic remedies when a member state uses terror under flags. Require witnesses from non-aligned species. Mandate census, library, and seed provision. And bind the initiating power under the same oversight and punishments. An altari jurist stood, and the taps, and the cusps. You will not place God hands in every petty tyrant's glove. Leah shook her head. We're not handing out city vanish buttons. We are sharing energy harvest for hospitals and farms. We are sharing field disruptors that make guns sullen. We are sharing playbooks for calm boarding and polite arrests. We will not share displacement beyond medical evacuation until we have a generation raised under a politics that makes abuses unlikely. Teach restraint before you teach miracles. A economist asked if Earth would disarm. Noah answered with a tired smile that carried more honesty than a speech. "We won't be the first to set down a shield," he said, "but we'll be obnoxiously eager to convert shipyards. You'll know we mean it when our largest hulls stop swallowing starlight and start carrying libraries." He turned a page. "We call them scholar class, big as mountains, slow as hymns, built to turn siege budgets into syllabus budgets. We've laid the first ribs. The hall listened as numbers replaced adjectives, tonnage turned into classroom counts, power plants into desalination kits, docking rings into greenhouses. Cynics did sums too and nodded despite themselves. Money is a moral language when you write it in roofs. The vote took 2 days. The clauses passed by a margin that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. The empty throne chairs now dusty with irrelevance. The coalition admiral voted yes and sent Leah a note that read simply, "Lesson received." She wrote back, "Tuition waived." After the session, Noah walked a long loop through Unity Spire's quieter levels until he reached the hall where the museum case stood. He watched 3 children trace the pen's reflection on glass, daring each other to tap the surface, and then deciding together not to. He looked up. The line above the door had acquired a small plate beneath it in a dozen scripts carved by a dozen hands. "We try to make this true." He found Leah on a balcony looking at ships he hoped he would never have to count as threats again. "How long?" he asked. "Until we are boring." She laughed, not unkindly. "We're halfway there. We made rules for ourselves and our enemies. Boredom begins when rules become habits and habits become culture." She pointed at a distant hull catching weak sunlight. It was unfinished, but you could read its purpose in the way its frame opened like a hand. "We build enough of those and a kid far away grows up thinking the most dangerous thing a human ship can do is drop a library on your roof without asking." Below them, a trader from the rim took a jalopy of the brushed steel card that had wandered from plaza to museum, from epitaph to creed. The photo would show a reflection, a man in an old uniform, a woman with a lantern pin, a shipyard finding a new grammar for strength. It would also show the engraving unchanged and newly true. For the light, and for once, the galaxy understood that the light was not a spotlight pointed at an enemy's shame. It was a lamp held low over a road everyone had to walk, steady hands choosing to bear its weight together.